Good morning, Game Masters, and welcome back to GM Philosophy, where we dive into the biggest debates in tabletop RPGs. Today, we are asking, has 5E's power creep and modern player sensitivity made character mortality a joke? Back in the day, your character could die from a single bad decision, a poor die roll, or an unlucky encounter. But in 5E, between forgiving death saves, near endless healing, and abundant resurrection magic, character mortality has become almost non-existent, especially at higher levels. Some argue that this ruins the tension that makes victories feel earned, while others say the game has simply evolved to focus more on storytelling than survival. In the same vein, are modern players too attached to their characters, making death feel like a personal attack instead of a natural part of the game? Should GMs be killing more characters to bring back the thrill of risk, or does high mortality gameplay make for a worse experience overall? And if death isn't the answer, what should GMs do to keep danger real at the table? Today, we're breaking it all down: 5E's mechanics, players' attitudes, and whether GMs should bring back the fear of death or find new ways to challenge their players. Let's get into it. How you guys doing this morning?
Doing pretty good.
Awesome.
Good. Happy Saturday, everyone.
Yeah.
Happy Saturday.
Got my coffee, so I'm good.
That's it.
My mug matches my shirt. Not
Beautiful.
planned.
Nice.
I got some lemon, strawberry lemonade over here.
Heck yeah. I have not yet caffeinated. I'm gonna do it after the episode.
Cool. Don't know how you could. I know it's earlier for you guys than it is for me.
Yeah.
Craig is in the chat. Hey Craig, how's it going? Happy Saturday. Craig is our latest gold level Ko-Fi supporter. Thank you so much for supporting the channel, Craig.
Yeah.
And if anyone else wants to check out the Ko-Fi, wants to check out my new free 10 tips on how to be a better GM ebook, or if you want to join our Discord, link is in the description for all of those things. But I say let's dive into this conversation. And Kelf, I think you had a pretty awesome kind of outline laid out.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I've been, sitting on for a while with 5th edition, especially, is just how much it almost seems like 5th edition's design is almost actively trying to prevent character death in a way. Just the way that players can long rest simple 8 hours and they're suddenly back up to full health no matter what happened the day before. Death saves are kind of a laugh because one hit point can bring you back and you're back up and you're rolling. And especially with the new 2024 Players Handbook update, they doubled the amount of healing in spells like Cure Wounds and Healing Word and all that per spell level. I mean, it's one of those things where if death in D&D and RPGs, by extension, isn't the threat, what is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I can commiserate there with the mechanics, making it seem almost impossible at this point. I recently, a couple sessions ago, 5th level party of 5, attacked with 2 wyverns,
mm-hmm.
the big dragon things, and I actually souped up those monsters as well. I did drop one character to 0 and almost dropped another character to 0, but they were back up almost immediately. Killed one of the wyverns and chased off the other.
Yeah.
Like they're 5th level. This is, the early tier of play, and they're already facing pretty powerful monsters and just taking it in stride. Matter of fact, they didn't even go on a long rest before continuing the arc. They just kept on going on the adventure. And that's one of those things where I started to wonder. It's like, wait a minute, they're not going to take. And I use gritty realism, where long rest takes longer, which is one of the solutions, by the way. But even with that, they kept on going. They were low on spell slots. They were low on hit dice. They were low on a lot of things, and they still just kept on going. Faced another two very, what I would have thought were very difficult encounters, and all came out of it unscathed. And that's in the next session. So it's the mechanics really do seem to be keeping players alive. Healing is very easy. Hit points are very high.
Yep.
And the mechanics just seem to be focused that way. I've never played AD&D, but I've heard that AD&D is brutal.
Well, and that was the whole thing about old school D&D. Like, original D&D had essentially the reason why you didn't worry so much about like perfecting your character. You rolled your stats down the line. Your first die roll was your strength, your second was your dex, your third was your con. The reason why you did that is because you were not sitting there trying to optimize your character design. You weren't sitting there trying to come up with the most efficient paladin who, keeps their charisma high, keeps their strength high, dumps their intelligence, stuff like that. You rolled because you had to walk up to the table with 5 or 6 characters because they were going to die. And that's kind of in the same way that a lot of OSR games, and like Dungeon Crawl Classics, for example, they have similar setups where you make like 3 or 4 characters to start the game with because they are going to die, because it's just how it is. And it's when they die that you end up having 1 or 2 or maybe 3, if you're lucky, characters out of this entire group of maybe 10 that survive to become a level 1 heroes. Like they're essentially 0th level commoners with what they do. And that in itself makes them feel earned. I mean, just yesterday, I was helping a buddy of mine make a character who is a Triton Paladin of the Open Sea and Hexblade Warlock, who's like an Aquaman kind of character. And he's a noble who's like, his father was kicked off the throne. And it's like, I can look at this character and think of 1,000 ways to make them, start out at level 1 or level 2 as already overpowered. But it's like, is there a challenge in that? I don't know. I don't know if edition anymore.
So there's obviously so here's an interesting thing. This is what I think of a lot of times. So in 5e, it is a lot more difficult to die than it was in 3rd edition, for example. In 3rd edition, you didn't have ranged healing spells. Like, which one is it? Healing Word, where you can heal them for
bonus action as well.
Yeah, it's a bonus action. So Healing Word, I feel like, ramped up the healing in a massive way. It used to be, the whole strategy was, how can we get our healer to touch them? That was like what was required. It's like if the tank went down and the dragon was standing over him, it's like, oh God, should we even run up there? So that was like a whole thing. But now it's a ranged thing. So it's obviously it's moved more in that direction. I do think that people get more attached to their characters than they used to. And I think that's part of it. I think that's part of why they do it.
I think the mechanics are just leaning into a genre of fantasy. And it's really funny because I think it's the Dungeon Master Guide talks about different genres of fantasy. And it talks about pulp fantasy and sword and sandal and gritty fantasy and power fantasy. And I look at the 5e rule set and say, that's all power fantasy. I'm sorry. Yeah. These are superheroes, even at early levels. Started the Dunes of Fate campaign just last night with Josh, and I was like, oh man, only 3rd level. And I'm thinking, oh no, I'm so weak. And then I get into fights and stuff, and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm fine. I'm good. and that's only 3rd level. I can't imagine 13th. I'm unstoppable.
Oh God. I mean, after 10th, you are into like superhero levels. You're starting to traipse into like the godhood realms.
Mm-hmm.
Just the simple things that you can do. I mean, you mentioned before 5th level characters. That's Revivify comes online
Yeah.
at 5th level. I mean, as long as you have a diamond and you get to them within a minute, then they're good. It's not even a question. And what, Resurrection's a 7th level spell, so you got to be like 13th level for that, and True Resurrection is a 9th level spell. So I mean, once you're at those points, as long as you got the resources, as long as you can get those diamonds, death is just not even a question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Revivify is a pretty wild spell. That's
Yeah.
a pretty wild spell. One thing that I think, so there's an interesting question here is like, okay, it's like, if you as a GM want to make the game more dangerous, you kind of have to, if you follow like the CR rating, it's not going to be very dangerous.
Yeah.
And if you play it rules as written, it's not going to be very dangerous. But so you can make it more deadly, but you kind of have to do it on your own. You have to go beyond what I feel like the book says to do.
Yeah.
And you have to maybe put in a few more mechanics. Like, for example, it's in D&D. I mean, and I understand you can only get so complicated, but for example, there is no like severed limbs rule really. Like, it's like, it's not like, or like being maimed or something like that. And it's like, well, what if they get a bone broken? What happens? It's like, well, just heal spell and then they get their hit points back and they're fine. Yeah. I don't usually treat it like that. It's like a heal spell is going to help a lot, but there's a point to where if a bone is seriously broken, it's more like a restoration type thing or something like that.
And to that point, there's a ring of restoration. Like there is an item that within like a day or something, you're gonna get this limb back. Well, and funny you say about the limbs. Like one of the cooler mechanics that has been around has been for monsters. The troll has that loathsome limb ability where if it's bloodied and it takes so much slashing damage, it chops the limb off. And I know the original the 2014 player's handbook had stuff like system shock and massive damage, where if you took damage equal to half of your max HP, then you would have to roll on a table to be stunned or something like that. But it's an optional roll. It's not even meant to be, in the core components. And to that point about the CR, while I was doing some research for this topic, I found on a blog literally from the blog of Holding, that a review of the monster manual found that the hit points and damage outputs of the official monsters in the monster manual are lower than what the Dungeon Master's Guide suggests for their CRs, that they deal slightly less damage and have lower attack bonuses than the formulas would predict. So even the monster manual is reining stuff in against the players.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of things that I did when I created my homebrew world. I wanted it to be gritty and dark, a little bit of a lower magic setting. And so I implemented a couple rules that are actually in the Dungeon Master Guide and a couple that are just my own thing. One of them was the gritty realism rule. A long rest takes a lot longer. You don't get your spell slots back as fast. And all that kind of stuff. I also made spell casting focuses very rare and very difficult to make. Right now there's 3 full casters and a half caster in my party. Only one of them has a focus. And he had to do a bunch of side stuff. He had to find a bunch of elements. He had to perform a ritual with a bunch of really difficult checks, and all that. So because the spell casting components, verbal, somatic, and material components, are hand waved by a bunch of people, and then they complain that, well, spellcasting is too easy. Well,
Yep.
don't hand wave the components. And another thing that I do, there's a crit hit chart. So like if you get critical on you, there's not a permanent injury thing, but there is a significant detriment in the battle. Maybe you drop everything in your hands. Maybe you can't move the next round or take reactions or something. And then another thing that I do on the player side is if you ever drop to 0 hit points, you take a level of exhaustion.
Yeah.
And you keep doing that. And so for that fight with the wyverns that I mentioned before, for the whole rest of that arc up to this point, my fighter and now my sorcerer are both at 1 level of exhaustion, which is, okay. But if it goes to 2, that's a big deal. So you keep doing that. And then from the dungeon master side, ramp up the monsters. What they give you in the monster manual is the average HP. Take it all the way to full. If it's 7d10, give them the full 70. Give them that full 70. Doubling damage on monsters is a good way to make them scarier.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of things you can do. I think, and even so is the thing. Even so, it's still almost impossible to kill PCs.
Yeah, I too have implemented like 2 major house rules in one of the campaigns that I'm running, that were designed to make things gain a little bit more of that level of attrition, where there's one that I'm using called Death's Door, where when you drop to 0 hit points, you gain a level of exhaustion, you fall prone, you can't concentrate during that time until you get some healing back, and you can only do 1 action or bonus action during that time. So it's like, it's meant to make it so that like dropping to 0 hit points is not something you want to do, because for the longest time in 5th edition, dropping to 0 hit points is actually the best thing that you can do, because if the closer you can stay to 0 hit points, the more effective healing is, because getting 5 hit points back when you're at 10 hit points to go up to 15 means nothing, but going from 0 to 5 means that you're back up and in the fight again. So it was almost an incentive for clerics and druids and paladins not to heal people until they actually dropped. And a similar, I'm also using a custom resting mechanic, where in my game a long rest does not give you all of your hit points back. I'm using like there's like 4 tiers of resting in mine, and quick rest, short rest, and long rest all require you to roll your hit dice. And a long rest gives you your lets you roll half of your maximum hit die for free, but you still have to roll your hit die.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one way that like I was really sitting on it. And it's not until you do a full rest where it's like 24 hours in a area of safety, like focusing on recovery, that you would get all of it back.
Mm-hmm.
Do we lose Josh? Oh yeah, I was about to say, I think we
Oh no. He must have clicked the wrong button.
I saw his eyes not opening again.
Oh no. Yeah. The still having to use hit die to get health back is another one. I haven't implemented that one, but even with a long rest, you might get all your hit die back, but you still have to use those hit die to regain health.
Yep. That's
so yeah, I really do think while we're waiting for Josh to get back, the mechanics really are kind of an issue if you want death to be a real risk. As we move into the secondary topics, I really think 5e and 24, even more than the 2014, it really does present a challenge if you want death to be the threat, which I think, honestly, for me at least, the what makes a hero heroic is that they are willing to put their life on the line.
Yeah.
That's a big, part of what makes a hero a hero. So that being willing to do it. So that last question of, well, if not death, then what? What's the risk?
Yeah, and I think like you like you were saying, or Josh was saying about the losing a limb or having some kind of scar or debilitating, debilitating effect that kind of drains on you. I mean, exhaustion is one thing that is that is a level of attrition, but like, yeah, like if death isn't that threat, because okay, you lose an arm again, resurrection magic is there. And
there's the full restoration, like the greater cure stuff that's like, and it's not even like 9th level spells. They're irregular spells. You're like, oh yeah, you regrow all your limbs if you lost any, as long as you still have your head and your torso. You're good even at 0 HP. You can still get healed later. It's the Monty Python thing. It's like, wait, you got turned into a newt? It's like, well, I got better.
I got better. Exactly.
That's the whole thing. Even the guy that's losing all his arms and his legs in that same movie, that guy, he could get better too. Anyone, you can just get better there. So the mechanics really are a thing. And honestly,
there he is.
He's back. Yay.
Internet was acting weird. Time to install that Ethernet cable.
To-do list.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, and as far as mechanics, that there are options there. There are people that, they love 5e for what it is, and it is great for heroic fantasy, but if you really want that, grittier thing, 5e is great, but look at other systems. Look at older editions.
Yeah.
What, 2nd, 3rd edition, even AD&D. And there's retro clones of AD&D that make it a lot more usable. I think Dungeon Crawl Classics, Basic Fantasy apparently is free. Somebody on the Discord, opened my eyes to that one. And even if you want to order a hard copy, it's very affordable. And it's basically AD&D, but modernized,
And that's the thing. I do appreciate, the old school Renaissance, the OSR, like Dungeon Crawl Classics, because those are the old grittier save or die. The trap isn't just gonna, roll 3d6. No, this is gonna be the death of your character if you fail this. Like there's no save, like you can attempt to save against it, but that's it. But kind of the second point there, like, how are modern players willing and ready to deal with that? I mean, I'll be honest with you. I'm, as somebody playing in Josh's, the Barrenlands campaign, I've put time and thought into my character, my background, finding and generating art for soul, and putting in that effort. And if he were to die, like, sure, I can disconnect myself, but it's like that kind of feels like a lost investment in a way. And it's one of those things where, sure, I'll always have that character, I'll always have that time, but if you're playing in a campaign that is 200, 300, 400 hours long, and your character dies in that because of like a bunged up trap roll, is that a satisfying death? Is that not a satisfying death? Like, isn't that what happens where sometimes your character just gets unlucky and falls into a pit?
This is the part of the conversation I think that I like the most, is talking about like player investment. And I think so there is an element. So Stacy actually said something really, really good here. D&D is a hero story. Why should the characters be facing potential death at every frequency or at a high frequency? Maybe it wasn't before, but it also had a reputation of DM versus player more in the past.
That is true.
Yeah. I kind of feel like when I am playing with characters or playing with players, I should say, the big question is, does this player love this character? Do they want to continue playing with this character? So this is one big question, and it kind of like that overarching question is more important to me than character death. In this sense, if a character dies, that by no means means the end of that character's journey. If the player doesn't want to be done with that character, if they say the story's not done, I've done a lot of different things to deal with this. I will say that my campaigns used to be a lot more lethal than they are these days. These days, I don't. I feel like it can be true, and I think that this is maybe why 5e has made it easier to survive. I do think that dying in D&D can be a feel bad moment. And I think that I'm more sensitive to feel bad moments now than I was like 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I mean, I might kill 2, 3, 4 player characters a session, let's find out. But now I'm kind of like, well, player death is something that I would approach with a bit more caution. I would say that even if D&D didn't make the rules more, didn't make the rules, make it more difficult for players to die or lose their characters, I would still have that mindset. But it's like character death does not have to mean the end of that character's journey. I've done things like their ghost is there, gets stuck between the here and there, and they float around. And while they're dead, they can't interact with anything. They can't communicate with anyone unless someone casts a spell like to try to communicate with them or anything. And really, all they can do is observe until someone brings back their body or something, unless they decide they want to pass on. Another thing you can do is I've done like side quest type things where that character goes to their afterlife, and then they have to like bargain to come back or something like that. So like, I kind of feel like the big question is, does the player wish to continue that character's story, or are they fine with it being done? If they want to keep playing that character, if they want to keep telling that story, then it's like, that's awesome. Death is not the end, at least not right now. It's not. But you may have to jump through some hoops and do some crazy things to come back.
Yeah. To Stacy's comment there, talking about D&D as a hero story. Yes, it is. But what makes a hero a hero? 5e is not a hero game. It's a superhero game.
Yeah.
Look at the character abilities. These are not regular things. These are superpowers. What makes somebody a hero isn't superpowers. What makes somebody a hero is their character traits. What made Captain America a great superhero were all the things he already had before the serum.
Yep.
He was already a man of character. He was already a man of honesty. He was already a man who was willing to go down in a fight based on principle. He was saying, I can do this all day before he was 6'4" and shredded. He was already a hero before he got the serum. And I think that characters need to do that same thing. Why should they be facing potential death on a frequent basis? I don't know. Name me a single actual heroic fantasy or even modern movie where the hero isn't facing death on a frequent basis. Watch Die Hard, watch Lord of the Rings, watch any of these hero movies. They are facing death. They're staring death in the face on a frequent basis. If that threat isn't real, they're not heroes. They're bullies. Maybe they're principled bullies, but they're bullies. They're just walking all over everything, and it's like, no, you're gods among mortals. What makes a hero is that they might not win, but they're willing to face the fight anyway.
Yeah, and they have those moments of like rest where, like in Lord of the Rings, when they when they go to the elves, they have a moment where it's the action is down and things are relaxed, but then they're back out into it. You know, they're running through the hills. I can't even remember what those birds were that attacked them, but you know, like, you know, going through the mines of Moria, fight, you know, having to deal with the goblins. Like, death is always around the corner, and it is that aspect that makes it the adventure, that the hero, you know, no good adventure ever started out with, you know, the sun rose and everyone was happy, and the hero had to fight nobody, and everything was good. Like, it's a one-page adventure that means nothing. It's the attrition, it's the hardship, it's the hard-fought victories. It is them facing death. It is that scene where Shelob poisons Frodo, and you know, he's dying and foaming from the mouth, and Sam goes up and, you know, uses the you know, the liquid from the elves and like from Galadriel, and it's like, this is the moment. You know, Frodo almost died, he's the ring bearer, and you know, but because of Sam and because of, you know, their will to live, they continued. And I mean, Sam's the real hero in that anyway, but
look at you know, pulling from my background in literature, the idea of the monomyth, or the hero with 1,000 faces, part of that arc. And this is a story that, you know, we have, you know, basically proven, so to speak, it's not science, it's art, but that we've basically proven resonates with human beings, is this story of the monomyth. Almost every single story follows this arc. These heroic stories follow this arc, and they resonate. Even though we know what's coming, we still feel that part of that arc is facing death.
Yeah,
whether or not they actually face death, part of that arc is facing death. I think death should be a real threat. I think losing your very life is that threat, and you have to be able to face that.
I want to address Jason's comment here, which is actually a really good question. As a DM, what are your thoughts on having that enemy continue to attack PC after they're down to 0 to make sure they aren't healed? So this is what I do. Here's, if it's not a like a boss fight, or if this villain is not intended to be especially vicious, like if it's just a normal fight, like they're fighting an animal or they're fighting a monster, you know, and blah, 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 then I never have them do this. I reserve this for villains who are supposed to be especially evil and especially like scary. And I use this as a tactic actually to make it like, to make that more pronounced. So for example, if they're fighting just a normal henchman, I'll almost never have them coup de grace. They're the fallen enemies. But if they're fighting like the big bad in the halfway through the campaign, if they have a skirmish with them, he will absolutely execute anyone who goes down around him. And I try to do that as like a story mechanism to say to my players, this is actually very serious. This person will kill all of you if you do not find a way to stop them. You know. Or if you don't run, like, you know, this person. So anyway, good question, Jason. That's how I use it.
I would add to that, particularly vicious, particularly vicious humanoid opponents, you know, particularly evil, but also monsters that are hunting. You know, that was one of the things with the aforementioned wyvern fight. They were hungry monsters. They wanted a meal. They would have continued to attack the fighter had the rest of the party not intervened, even when he was at 0 hit points. And so that's one of those things, like that's realistic. I don't feel like an apology or case even has to be made for that, but it's just another scenario in which attacking at 0 HP makes sense. It's a hungry animal. It wants its food. It's not there to be like, oh, I'm going to take you out of the fight and then focus on everyone else. It's like, no, you're going to die. I'm going to eat you later and chase everyone else away, but I'm going to make sure you're dead first.
That whole aspect is actually the reason why I implemented the Death's Door mechanic into one of the campaigns I'm running, because when they drop to 0, they're not out of the game. They're not, you know, unconscious, incapacitated or anything. Yeah, they gain that level of exhaustion. They fall prone, and they can only do an action or a bonus action. They can't do reactions, but they're still able to get up. They're still able to swing their sword and continue to fight. And that means that they're at 0 hit points. They are making death saves at the end of their turn. And so if that orc that they're, as they're staggering and they're swinging their sword to try and keep themselves alive, that orc has every right to keep going at them, making it that decision of, do I actually continue to attack, or do I hold back? Do I try and get with the rest of my team? Do I disengage and try and fall back? Because it is always one of those things where it like it's a feel bad moment when the cleric goes down, or the somebody goes down, and you have that goblin that just pokes him with a dagger a couple times, and it's like, well, there's 3 deaths fails, like, I sealed your fate. So that sucks.
But a goblin might do that.
Oh, sure, yeah. A goblin might be sadistic.
So and that's another thing, and get the whole player sensitivity thing, and people, well, that might be a feel bad. And I have one player in particular, mother of 4 small children, no less. She does not have time to roll up a new character. In fact, the character that she has, I basically built for her. And that's, she told me what she wanted and I built it out. She does not have time to build a new character. And that is something to take a factor, but, as far as the story goes, if it comes to that, do I continue, would I be just as brutal on that character as I would on the rest of the characters? I have a couple other players who are like, they roll up characters for fun, and they're like, hey John, can I roll this character next? I'm like, let's at least finish the story arc with this guy, and then he can ride into the sunset, and somebody else can come on. But for that player in particular, or a player who has a lot invested into the story of their character, should I be just as brutal? And I think yes, because that's what makes someone a hero. That's what makes you and to the credit of the one player that I have, she plays that ranger as a very cautious person. She plays that character. He's always in the background. He's looking for places to hide. He's stealthing. He's taking his shots from a distance, all that stuff. And she plays him very accurately to, the extent of someone who would have self-preservation as a primary motive. Whereas, the orc fighter was like, oh, dragon things, let's go get him. He's an orc. He wants a glorious death. And so that's, it's very different, but that's up to the player. I'm going to be like, well, the world is going to treat you the way that you act. If you're being cautious, you're more likely to survive. If you're gung-ho Leroy Jenkins, then you're going to get Leroy Jenkins. So
yeah, and I definitely feel that about having a player, that's either really attached to a character or somebody that doesn't have the time or desire to make a new one. I got a very good friend of mine who loves D&D. He loves playing every single week, but he does not like making characters. And he doesn't like having multiple characters at a time. Like he doesn't like to swap between them that often. And I know for him, he has said in moments like, oh, if my character dies, like, I guess that's it, because he doesn't like to have to learn a new character. He doesn't really focus a lot on his character background. He's much more of a kind of video game character is what I think of it, where he plays in the 2 campaigns that he plays in, one he plays a barbarian, the other one he plays a wizard. So it's all about damage output, how many explosions and booms and swings can he do, and I mean that's how he has fun. But it's definitely one of those things where I have to consider, if I were to kill his character, not only is that going to be a feel bad moment, that is going to be more time and effort that I would have to sit down and work with him to make a character, because he doesn't like making his own character.
Right. And I feel like that's a legitimate side of player sensitivity, and because so a lot of people will be like, no, kill the PCs, blah, blah, blah. And it's, well, hold up. there are legitimate reasons for players to be sensitive about their characters.
Yeah.
I mean, I think those two circumstances are one of them, but there's somebody in the Discord, and I'm going to leave the name out for reasons, but has talked about their players just running rampant, throwing magic spells all over the place, even when there's, laws against it, and they're like, murdering people, whether or not they're bad people, killing shopkeepers and everything. But then still that fear of, do I kill those PCs? Even though the world would, the law would be after them, the mob bosses would be after them, the other mages in the city would be after them for starting a witch hunt. But these are my friends, and I don't want to kill their characters. I think that's the side of player sensitivity where it's like, no, they're not respecting your game, and they need to play your game correctly. And by all means, go after them in that sense. It's like, oh, well, they're going to feel you're feeling bad right now because they're not respecting your game.
That's actually a really good example. I know what example you're talking about. And that game does have, so when I've heard that person talk about their game, that game does sound like it has elements of players who are not taking the game seriously enough from a role play aspect, but also just not taking like the role play aspect of TTRPGs seriously enough and really delving into it. That sounds more like a crazy hack and slash mayhem kind of game, which I'm not super interested in. And I think most GMs aren't. Most GMs want the players to respect the narrative of the characters. And this brings me to this comment by Waz. Waz has been playing Hector in the Barren Lands, who has a missing leg, has exhaustion and pain, and they're driving factors for him. And see, now this I feel like I'm very blessed and I'm very fortunate and thankful that I actually get to game with mature gamers who really, really take their characters very seriously. So like, for example, Hector, every character that I'm playing Grom in William's campaign alongside Waz's character, Tarnik. And every campaign that Waz is just an example, but a good example. Every campaign I've seen Waz play in, it's always much more immersive than just, like what treasure can I get? What can I smash with my axe? It's always like there are these different levels of like role playing the character, and sometimes facing death is a really, really fantastic role play opportunity. And a lot of times players miss that, but that's almost out of the GM's control, aside from who the GM decides to game with. So choosing to game with the right kinds of players is actually maybe a super important part of the conversation. And I will also say, like, so my character Grom in William's game, he's getting ready to face possible death a second time. But like the way that I approach it is it's a story, right? And it's like, if Grom dies and his story ends, that's kind of a sad moment. Yes, I did have a lot of fun playing him, but I'm happy that the story got told, But I think that a lot of players don't think about it that way. I think a lot of players think about it as like, I have to win. When I say win, I mean, I have to slay all the enemies and get all the loot kind of like mentality, like, and I can't die, like nothing should be able to touch me kind of like thing. I feel like that style of role play is really common among like a very wide swath of like more casual players. And I do think that for a lot of game masters, those players are like the predominant population at their tables. And so that, it has to be said, I think that player mindset sometimes plays a huge factor, and there's not always a lot that GMs can do to control that. Aside from trying to coax those players into role playing through that death experience or that near death experience in like a more immersive way. And it's actually fun to do that. And I think that a lot of players don't understand the hidden gold that is like role playing through a life-threatening situation or even a life-ending situation.
And I want to point out something that Craig said in the chat. about continuing campaign after a TPK. Because I actually did that in my New Age campaign. That campaign started out based around the Scales of War adventure path from 4th edition, and the players were in Castle Rivenroar. They were fighting they were fighting through the goblins in there, and they made a choice at one point to pursue one of the guard drakes that was in it backwards towards where they had not cleared out all the goblins. When they did that, they decided to kind of set up in a room where they were going to, make a stand against some goblins that were on their way. But they did not realize in that moment how many goblins were still left on the floor that they were on of that castle. And so they got swarmed on both sides. They had assassin goblins, they had brute goblins, they had all kinds of enemies that were coming at them. And two of the goblins that were in there were these they were like these smoke, or I forget exactly what they were, but like they had the ability to create orbs of darkness, and those orbs essentially split up the party in a way, because it separated the room, because it was a very small room, and one by one they started dropping, and the party went down. And what we did is we sat down, we rolled up new characters, and we essentially said, okay, the town of Brindle was attacked by goblins, and a bunch of folks were kidnapped and taken to Castle Rivenroar, and that original party was sent there to get them back. And now it's been about 10 days or so, and nobody has, they had one NPC from the castle get back to the town, and they don't know the fate of the party. And so they're now looking for another party to go up to the castle, find out what happened, recover these people. And it's like, you can sort of wash that as many times as you would honestly need. I mean, granted, you don't want to keep throwing, tomatoes at a wall, but at the end of the day, that is a way that you can do that, is have those patrons, those, quest givers keep pushing it towards that. But to the second point of that, the length of the arcs assumes a long character life. That is just a reality that you have to deal with when you are making a character with the potential to die, is that while you can think like this character is going to have a long drawn out arc, you got to realize they could die next session, and that arc might not go fully fulfilled. While there are options to bring them back, or like Josh was saying about coming back as a ghost and, speaking to the party and stuff like that, you have to contend with the fact that for some of them, that story is just going to come to an end when they drop, and that's just kind of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I one time TPK'd a party with a level 3 party with Whale of the Banshee. They found this wizard in the middle of nowhere with this super sophisticated tower, and so they knocked on his door, started messing with him, and I kept giving them clues. I'm like, there's a lot here to indicate he's probably a very high level wizard, and they were actually being trolls kind of to this wizard. They were kind of trolling him, and he kept saying things like, "Get out of here," like he was just not liking him. And they went far enough, and they eventually they tried to pickpocket him, and he noticed, and then he was like, "You better leave right now or else." And then they didn't leave, and he was like, Whale of the Banshee, and they all died. And they did continue that campaign. They all rolled up a character.
Yeah.
They rolled. And then they were like, well, we're never doing that again. We're never harassing a weird wizard in the middle of nowhere.
Harass a high-level caster. It's like psychic scream, your head explodes. Roll up a new character.
I'll say, Craig also asked what % of players have never seen a PC die. So again, in a little bit of the research I did, D&D Beyond did a report where only they averaged that only about one permanent character death per long campaign happens in modern 5th edition, where previously
in the party or per player,
like per campaign.
Oh, wow.
Like in long campaigns, they are reporting that it's an average of about 1 permanent character death per full campaign, with potentially multiple death and revivals. But like, we're talking about like, they're dead, they're gone, they are not coming back. But on where was it, thacorpg.blogspot, they reported that old school D&D had about 1.5 deaths per session. that on average 1 or 2 characters were gonna die per game night.
Yeah.
That's actually really funny.
So
here's a question. Would that make the game more fun or less fun for everyone? That's a question.
I think it depends on the kind of game you want to play, right? Yeah. I mean, going back to Lord of the Rings, I mean, it's kind of the core. It's in, Appendix N or whatever it was, the original, inspirations for the how many permanent character deaths were there? 1, and 1 temporary character death, with a few, close calls. Frodo being the main culprit. There was exactly 1. So I think if you're going for these long stories, there really should be characters that survive. However, getting back to that original question, how many times did Aragorn almost die? Like, so many. How many times did Frodo almost die? So many. How many times, did Pippin do something dumb and everybody almost die? So many times. And so, yeah, maybe only 1 actual character death, but the threat needs to be there. And that's something that I think the mechanics, with certain options, or depending on, what level of monsters you're willing to throw at your party, or how much you're willing to homebrew other monsters, are you telling that kind of a story? Then yeah, there should be some character consistency. If you're, essentially playing Doom, but on a tabletop, then yeah, character death can be a lot more frequent.
Yeah, I out at the Pittsburgh Gaming Expo just this past year, I had the opportunity to sit down with Bob Worldbuilder and play in one of his games, and I could be completely wrong because now I'm second guessing myself, but I want to say Stacy would actually know in the chat. I want to say it was Dungeon Crawl Classics, but he had us do 3 separate characters per player, and the whole idea of it was that you were going to have characters die this game. And I think it was DCC, okay, and I think out of that, I ended up only with 1 character surviving out of my 3. I believe one player made it out with all their characters alive, and somebody had all their characters die in that whole thing. And I actually think that was a better experience because it made you realize what makes the hero, because it is that my character survived. He got through this, and having that opportunity to play these essentially throwaway characters that could evolve into something. The character of mine that survived was a guy who was a grave digger who carried around 2 giant chains, and I just called him 2 Chains. And in the adventure, one of his at one point his chains, one of his chains fell into this giant pit, and then a monster took his other one. So he was very depressed, and like that's like could be a character arc to play into later. And it's like, that was really fun. And that's a character I'm never going to forget. But it's like, I've played one-shot characters in 5e that I've poured hours into designing and creating and writing a backstory that I couldn't even remember their name off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting how, if you can engage that, the fun factor, if you can engage the emotional connection factor, engage. There's that magic element that really connects a player to their character, like that makes them really like the character. But it's even more than like, it's like it makes them invested in the character. And if they can get that, if you can get that unlocked, the game just takes on a whole new element, and people care more. But players will care a lot more, and they will take it way more seriously if they feel that way about their character. Now, we're coming up on the end of the hour here. We're going to cap it at an hour. So let's go around and do final statements about this. Let's start with John. John, what's your closing statement about this question of 5E's death mechanics? Are they too forgiving? What is your final answer?
I think that 5E is too forgiving on death rules as written. I think that there are modes, there are even little homebrew things that you can do to make death a much greater risk. So, and it's one of the reasons I'm going to switch to Shadow Dark at the end of this campaign. The threat of character death is a lot more real. But I think that as far as a character death is concerned, I think the threat of death has to be real for a character to be heroic. If they know they're going to survive, is it actually heroic? And I would submit that it's not. If there's very little threat for them to die, why even play the game at that point? If there's no threat for them to die, then they're going to start taking the game less seriously. Even they're going to be like, oh no, I'm just going to run into the middle of battle because the cleric's just going to get me up if I fall to zero anyway. And so I think that 5E is too forgiving. There are things that you can do to mitigate that and make it a lot grittier. There are other systems also that do that. But I think that that threat of death has to be real in order for that story to feel real, in order for things to really start to come together. And I think that's why in Lord of the Rings, when Boromir dies, that's something where everyone is suddenly like, oh wait, this is for real. Gandalf fell into the pit and people were like, oh no, this is for real. And even though Gandalf came back, Boromir didn't, and at the end, the fact that Aragorn took the throne of Gondor made that all the more meaningful because he promised a dying man that he would. And so I think that is something that's very significant. And as somebody, hypothetically in an alternate universe, who is Boromir's player? And if I were Boromir's player, I would still be remembering Boromir, even as I came in with a new character, maybe Éomer or Theoden or some secondary character. I come in with another character and carry out the story. But I remember Boromir and I'm like, wait a minute, my character's death made the story, made the end game so much more impactful. And I think that is a very important part of it. Should it be more frequent? I think so. As frequent as AD&D, maybe not that frequent, but it has to be real. The threat of death has to be real, and I do not think 5E does a good job of lending itself to that. At least rules as written. So those are my final thoughts.
Very good. How about you, Kelf? What are your final thoughts?
Well, before I get into that, I've just had a thought about what John was saying regarding who Boromir's player is, and you can excuse me if I butcher this, but his brother's Éomer, right?
Faramir is
Faramir. Yeah. Okay. So the thing is that if you think about it, and who's his father?
Denethor.
Okay. In a way, you can kind of see the death of a player character going in two routes for a player of going. You can have somebody who's like, this character's death is going to mean something, and I'm going to move on as his younger brother who's going to, take that death in stride, and he's going to build onto something greater. And then you can have that player who's like, you killed my character. I'm now playing as his disgruntled father, and the whole time I'm just going to be sitting at the table eating grape tomatoes just to spite everyone and not doing anything worthwhile, and trying to burn this new character whenever, this my son, just to spite everyone. I just had that thought when you said about what Boromir's character would be.
Yeah.
It's actually a really good analogy for players to look at. How do you want to run it? Yeah, super good.
But yeah, I mean, personally for me, I have for a long time felt that 5th edition is just too forgiving. I think while 5th edition provides a super heroic high fantasy experience with low character mortality, there are other systems that span the spectrum that are better if you are looking for more lethality. Shadow Dark, like John said, but like Call of Cthulhu has those levels of like horror lethality where you are just playing as normal people, and like even a fight against a human is going to potentially kill you, and healing takes weeks. Pathfinder 2e even has a few ways that you can stave off death, but I still feel like 5th edition is definitely more geared towards that. And then, like we mentioned before, the OSR stuff, where it is classically designed to meet grind through characters. And while each game's mechanics set different expectations of risk, with like 5e giving you a ton of ways to cheat death, I think if you do want those more death-defying moments, 5e is what you want, because it is that superhero fantasy, because 5e was designed that way. And we can see it just through the evolution of D&D. Old school D&D was all about meat grindy, multiple characters, have one that survives. 3rd edition was super crunchy. It was heavy on its minutia, and you had characters that would survive, but it was still hardcore. 4th edition, you had to play tactically to survive. And now in 5th edition, it is more about the role play, even though it is still a combat simulator. So, and I think every table is going to be different. That's going to be the bottom line. Every table is going to be different, how you want to play it. Like I mentioned before, my Death's Door and my different resting mechanics to make things more of a challenge. Those are things that you can implement as a DM to make the game feel more, more death and more, levels of attrition.
Well said. Very well said. I think that my final word would be this. I think that healing word is a little too much. I think that when they brought in healing word, like there's something special about needing to touch the person to heal them. Like I kind of feel like, and then healing word kind of made that weird. I think mechanically that's my only real big, I kind of wish it wasn't in there thing. That I don't mind if players use it in my game. Totally cool. I just kind of feel like I miss the magic of like the healer needed to touch them. And I thought that was kind of significant.
Would you lean towards an alteration of that spell that removes the ranged effect, where Cure Wounds is an action and does more healing, but Healing Touch is a bonus action and does less healing, taking away that ranged effect? I think that's a legitimate way that you'd be able to adjust that, to add that physicality.
You totally could. I haven't done that, and I've thought about that, but I've decided not to do it, just because I think I'm basically honoring the spells the way they're written in the book is kind of important to me. I would say, like, probably more important than like taking away, more important than reinstating that magic of needing to touch them to heal them. So totally could do it. I don't see myself doing it. just because of trying to honor the way it's written out. But I think at the end of the day, it really depends on the big question of, what does this player think of this character? Do they really like this character? Are they invested in this character? If a player is really deeply invested in their character, then I want to be on that player's side in helping that character to survive long enough to accomplish the big mission. And so for me, I'm not super upset about the fact that there might be one meaningful actual real player death in a whole campaign, like only one, as opposed to like one per session like it used to be. I'm not actually too upset about that mechanic. I do tend to like the high fantasy, almost superhero-esque, like Marvel movie type action movie tropes, that go through. I kind of tend to like those. And so the grittier part of it is really fun, but I do think it's not as likely that you're going to find players who are into that, like as players who are into like the action movie type, style, which I'm totally fine with. But I will say that for me, it's always about, how can we get this player to really care about this character? And that's when the real magic will happen. And when that does happen, I will admit, I don't even want to kill that character, because then I'm having a lot more fun, because that player and that character are really in sync, and that's what makes the game like really, really good. Mm-hmm. So I will also say that I kind of think that game masters could make D&D way more like, you can institute rules like you have, Kelvin, and you can you can also just beef up monsters and make them nastier, or make more monsters, and you can totally still kill players. The game has progressed toward more giving players a bit more power over their own destiny than past iterations, and I kind of think that that's a part of the evolution of it. And I also think that that's kind of mirrored in our society. I think in our society nowadays, we have everyone wants to have control of their own destiny, much more so than back in that generation. I kind of believe it was more like you're a part of a particular social class, get in line, like fall in line kind of mindset. I kind of feel like it used to be a more prevailing mindset. And I do feel like what goes on in real life does get projected in the games we play, and in like the media we enjoy, in the art we create. And so I kind of think D&D is a bit of a reflection of that. And I will say, we do live in a world where right now nobody wants to be told they can't do a thing they want to do. Nobody wants to be told the thing you're doing is dumb, don't do it. Yeah. Nobody wants to be told maybe you want to do that, but it's not very wise and it's not very practical, and maybe you're not even using common sense. In real life today, I kind of feel like saying any of those to anyone about anything risks great offense, which is kind of a wild thing. But I do think that is a bit mirrored in modern 5e, like in the way that it's built.
I think at the same time, though, people don't want to be told that. It's like, oh, you can't do that. You can't do that. I have students that are like, I'm going into the NBA. And okay, so what's your backup plan? Because, like, let's be honest, you're 5'9" and you're not that athletic. And they're like, okay, oh, my backup plan is going to be a rapper. I'm like, oh, so you talk to producers? Like, no. I'm just gonna go out there and I'm gonna make the connections. I'm like, I'm sorry, you're 17 years old. If you don't already have connections, you're not gonna make them at this point in your life. And so it's like, they don't want to be told they don't want to do a thing, but that's not how life works. Eventually you're going to come up against, well, you took these actions, so here are these consequences. And I think if you want your game to be meaningful, and this gets back to the question of, well, what kind of game are you playing? But if you want your game to actually be meaningful, they have to have consequences. And one of the greatest consequences is, especially when swords are drawn, death is a possibility. It has to be a possibility. So that would be my answer to that.
Yeah, I figured you might have a few things to say about that, John. All right, that's going to wrap it up for today. Thank you, everyone, for coming to the conversation. Thank you, Cal. Thank you, John, so much for having this conversation with me. We will be back, I think, next Saturday with the next episode of Good Morning Game Masters. Make sure to join the Discord. Links in the description. And everyone have a great day. We'll catch you on the next one.
Yeah, have a good Saturday, everyone.
Okay.